Hello, I have been tagged. Not like that. Another Canadian who does book reviews on YouTube by the name of Fraser Simons has tagged me to participate in the 6 Tudor Queens 7 questions, starting with Catherine Aragon, a book that was your first love. When I was a teenager, I read garbage, the trashy stuff. I was really big into horror fiction. You know, it's just not very good. I was still at high school, actually, when I was 19. Let's not speak about the reason why. And I met a very intelligent young man by the name of Jason who really, well, changed my life, to put it simply. I met Jason and he said to me, put that shit away and you've got to start reading proper books. You're not a kid anymore. Like those books are just, they're for dummies. Read real books, all right? Smart guy. Give me some real books to read and we'll see. And he gave me Catcher in the Rye by Salinger and The Outsider by Camus. And I read them both in one weekend and it changed my life. I said to myself, I will never read horror fiction ever again. Like, it's not valuable. It's not worth my time. These real books, literature, it's human beings. The interaction, the emotions, the conflict. No aliens, no poltergeists, no werewolves, just real life. And that's real. That's what you can care about. You can't care about vampires and you can't care about parasitical aliens. You can't care about that stuff. It's stupid literature. It's the only thing worth reading. I will always remember those two books together. The fumbling 15-year-old Holden Caulfield wandering around Manhattan trying to get laid, and this Frenchman with no emotions who just sort of goes through his life quite looking at things but not feeling anything. I will say that those two books were my first love. Anne Boleyn, a book with a manipulative character. Okay. One of the books that I read this year, Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. In this book is one of the most loathsome and detestable characters you will ever meet in literature. Is she manipulative? In the beginning she is. And her name is Mildred. The main character, Philip Carey, he is studying medicine and he goes with his friend to this cafe for lunch and he sees this waitress. He's not attracted to her. He sees that she's very common and plain and really like beneath him socially. It seems like he resents her, but somehow he wants to get her attention. Like he wants her to recognize him as being a gentleman and someone who's studying medicine. And she doesn't. To his own chagrin, he somehow manages to fall in love with this truly horrible, horrible woman. And she just takes him for everything that he's got. And he's not stupid. He realizes it. He recognizes it. Like he is much smarter than she is. Like he knows when she is lying and he knows when she is doing one of her petty little manipulations. Like he is aware, he's fully aware, but he cannot rid himself of this love for this horrible, horrible character. Now, I love this book, Of Human Bondage. I think this is one of the greatest books of the 20th century. I really do. And I was so happy to read it again. In no little part because of this horrible character. I mean, she's just so awful. And you just keep hoping that he will eventually get rid of her. But she just keeps hanging around. And when you finally think that, okay, all right, now she's out of his life and he's safe, she comes back. So manipulative character, Mildred. Okay. Number 3, Jane Seymour. Cheers, Jane. A book that delivered what you wanted. I'm going to save that one for the end because the last question is not very positive and I want to end on a high note. So we're going to save question number 3, Jane Seymour, a book that delivered what you wanted, for the end of the video. Number 4, Anne of Cleves, a book that wasn't what you expected. I had to think about this one for a while. The first list of literature, which I became very obsessed with, was the 100 greatest English written novels of the 20th century. For someone who needed literary guidance, 100 novels to read was a great something to pursue. Still haven't even finished that list. I think I've got to 95%. Now, one of the books was this book, Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow. You see that? Look at how ugly that book is. Which burger franchise has that particular sickening orange color? Ragtime. Well, unless you're a musical historian, the title's not going to mean anything. So that's E.L. Doctorow. I mean, look at it. I mean, it's 2 letters away from being doctor, and nobody likes the doctor unless you're dating one of them. I mean, it looks like it was produced before the invention of marketing. It is a novel so original, so full of imagination and subtle pleasure, that to describe it further would only dilute the pure joy of reading. Sounds like somebody's getting lazy even writing their own little blurb. I picked this up because it was one of the novels on the list, and I did not read it for ages, just because it looks to be dripping with boredom. And this is one of the greatest American novels I've ever read. I don't like too much to talk about books that I haven't read for over 10 years, because even though I think my memory is quite good, it sometimes seems not to be the case. And I've read a couple of books this year that amazed me in the fact that I remembered them so fondly and they ended up being so awful. But I do remember this book was just incredible. Like, this novel is like being transported back in time over 100 years, placed in New York City, and here it is. Like, you can just feel the energy, I don't want to say zeitgeist, but that's the only word that's coming to my mind. The zeitgeist of the times. Like, you just feel it so strongly in this novel. It is, I finished reading this book and I wanted to know more about the author, Doctorow, to know how it was possible he could write so vividly about a time so long gone. If you're a fan of American literature, if you're American, this is a great novel to read. Don't be fooled by the boring title, the boring cover, the boring author's name. This is a great novel that will just pull you right in. Like, you can feel it. You can feel it, how alive and how recent it was by reading that novel. Number 5, Catherine Howard, a book that irritated you. A lot of books irritate me. But I want to be positive, and so I have tried to think of a book that irritated me in a good way. And I do believe I've put my finger on one. So I don't have a copy of it with me because it was lent to me a few years ago. Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Dobin. This book is just, like, when you read Dostoevsky and you feel like it has really added several intelligent layers to your brain, Berlin Alexanderplatz feels the same. In this novel, we are going back in time. We're going to Berlin between the First World War and the Second World War, when Germany was suffering a horrible depression. And it was not at all like the Germany that we might be familiar with today. All right, Grant, well then why did it irritate you? Because it raised a lot of questions about the translation of literature. So Berlin Alexanderplatz was written in German. I don't know when it was written, but most of the characters speak in a very slang way, using a lot of very colorful phrases. And to read that in English was I found it very jarring to see these old slang phrases that are not in common use anymore. And it just made me wonder how hard it is to translate something from any language. Like, if you have something that was written in 1920 and it was written in the slang expressions of 1920, how should you translate that today in the 2000 years? Should you translate it into slang expressions of the 20s, or should you try to modernize it so that people will be able to access it a little bit better? And also wondering how close I am to reading what it must be like in the original. Trying to give the translator the benefit of the doubt. Like, all right, okay, good job. It's not very beautiful to read in English today, but I think that you're doing something approximately what the author might have intended. So Berlin Alexanderplatz, but I love that book. Number 6, Catherine Parr, a book that was published after the death of the author. Wow, I'm really happy about this question. There was a period in my life where I read quite a lot of plays. I really enjoyed reading plays. I started with Edward Albee, The Zoo Story and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and where did I go from there? You may not believe this, but I think I read every play by Bertolt Brecht, reading Bertolt Brecht because the plays were incredible. The French existentialist playwright, no, not that guy, Jean Anouilh. I guess you just have to live in France to get the really deep culture, but I don't think anybody produces plays by Jean Anouilh anymore, but if they did, I would go multiple times because Jean Anouilh wrote some of the greatest plays of the 20th century. And if you've never heard of him, well, I don't know how I ever heard of him. I was probably looking for Edward Albee and I saw this other book of plays right there. But the playwright who published something after their death, are you already ahead of me? Eugene O'Neill, America's greatest playwright. Long Day's Journey into Night. It was such a personal story for him that he insisted that it would never be produced, it would never be put on in his life. And I believe what he did was he gave a sealed copy of it to his publisher and said, I'd only like you to look at this in the event of my death. Long Day's Journey into Night is the story of, it seems to be about Eugene O'Neill's family. And God, I read this a lifetime ago, maybe 25 years ago at least. I think his mother was not a heroin addict because I don't think it was called heroin at the time. What was before heroin? Opium, that's what it was. So she was some kind of a junkie, destroyed the family. And the play is truly heartbreaking and just always amazed me that someone could have that fortitude to say, I've written this masterpiece, but because it's too personal, I don't want it to be displayed to the public while I'm alive. But then again, he was very successful. He wrote the best plays of his generation. There's no question about that. So Eugene O'Neill, God, I've got to read those plays again. Iceman Cometh, Touch of the Poet, I remember being quite nice. And of course, Long Day's Journey into Night. Oh, just that pulling your heart out and crushing it. Number 7, Henry VIII, a chunky book that you hated. That one's very easy. That one is very sadly too easy. Ulysses, James Joyce. It's hard. I'm really conflicted about Ulysses. It is a work of art. However, it is an agony to read that. Was it any better when it was first published? I don't think so. I don't think anyone was reading Ulysses in Dublin the year it was published saying, oh boy, this is fun. I've had this metaphor for Ulysses. So imagine if there was a student, architecture, they had all these wild ideas about, I want to just turn the whole architecture world up on its head, and I want to just throw out all the old ways of doing things, and I want to do something totally new. And this James Joyce decided to build the most monstrously ugly edifice you've ever seen in your life. And all the architects came from all over the world to admire it, like, wow, that is fucking horrible. What was he thinking when he built that? And then they all admire it for its monstrosity, but nobody wants to live there, and nobody wants to buy it, and nobody wants to live beside it because it's just something so monstrously ugly. That's how I feel about James Joyce's Ulysses. All right, so we're going to go back to number 3, Jane Seymour, a book that delivered what you wanted. There's a lot I like about literature. And one of the things I like is when an author tries to write a novel that does something different. Because the majority of novels, very, very similar in their construction of characters and plot and climax and so on and so forth. So when an author tries to write something in a new way, I applaud that, even if the result doesn't end up being joyous. I'm drunk now. But one novel that is extremely different, and I'm very tempted to say the best thing I've ever read, with any limitations or categorizations about it, to say that the best thing I have ever read. It is a trilogy of 3 novels by John Dos Passos, and the trilogy is called USA. The first novel in the trilogy is the 42nd Parallel. The second book in the trilogy is called 1919, and the third book in the trilogy is called The Big Money. It is written in a very experimental way. I think a lot of people, upon first reading this, are going to be taken quite by surprise. Like, this is not something that you're going to be very familiar with. But don't give up. And don't lose hope. This, like USA by Dos Passos, is simply the history of America in 1,000 pages. Like, Ragtime is quite about New York City and that period of that music, ragtime. But USA is really about America becoming the country that became an empire. It is the most incredible thing that one human being named John, who I believe was of Portuguese descent, could sit down and draw together all of the greatness of the country known as America. USA is, the trilogy is simply divine. Now, excuse me for, going quite overboard with the praise, but I can't think of anything that I have read better. I remember exactly when I was reading this novel because I was living in Budapest then. Some friends of mine, we decided that we were going to go to the south of Hungary to a village called Mohács, to this spring celebration, which is known as the Busolyárás. The idea is that they are scaring away the winter and they are heralding in the spring weather with quite a lot of drinking and dancing and eating and singing and general merriment. And I brought this monstrous book with me. I couldn't stop reading it. Like, in the midst of this wonderful celebration, hardly tear myself away from reading this incredible novel. It was just too good to put down. Grant Loves Books gets tagged. Thank you very much to Fraser Simons for nominating me for this book tag. I appreciate it quite a lot because I think you know that I'm really working quite hard on my university studies. I don't have any time to read some of the books that I would generally be reviewing. The fun books that I like to read. I should be tagging some other book reviewers on YouTube, but I do only know one. I only know Fraser Simons. A couple of other book reviewers subscribed to my channel earlier on, and I guess I didn't realize how important it was to subscribe to their channel as a token of solidarity, and so they kind of abandoned me. But I won't make that mistake again in the future. So if you're a book reviewer on YouTube and you subscribe to my channel, I will subscribe to your channel back. So I should be tagging some other booktubers, but I only just know the one guy. And he has his channel, as you can see in the link, and he lives in the Canadian hinterland, like somewhere outside of goddamn Calgary. And I don't know if you know this about small town Canada, but the internet is not really working very well in these very rural locations, and that what they have to do at the weekends is they have to get all the children from the village, and the children, they hold these these wire coat hangers, the wire ones, and the children have to hold up the coat hangers, and then they run anti-clockwise around the main radio tower to generate the signal. And all the teenagers from the village, they have to hold up golf clubs, and they run clockwise in a larger circle around the children. And this counter rotation of the two electrical forces generates the internet in these small Canadian villages. And also it gives the young people some exercise, because we tend towards fat in Canada. So it's nice. It's a good thing at the weekends for the young people to do. Children do complain, especially when there's lightning. But, if you want the internet, you've got to work for it. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Grant Loves Books.